morning and welcome to the Superintendent's Workshop today, July 26th. This meeting is being televised. At this time, the purpose of the meeting is for the Superintendent to have a workshop, and I will turn this meeting over to Dr. Rendell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This morning we're going to talk a little bit about the budget for 2016-17 and the proposed millage rates. Mr. Morrison is going to take us through the budget book, not entirely, but through some of the parts of the budget book. Talk a little bit about millage levy. We do have a public hearing this evening about the proposed millage rates. Time permitting this morning, we will also have an update on performance contracting. It was something that we entered into about a year ago, and we do have some updates on some projects that we are implementing right now with performance contracting. So time permitting this morning, we'll have a presentation from some of those companies. Right now, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Morrison.
Thank you, Dr. Rendell. Good morning, board members. Good morning, fellow colleagues and those in attendance with us today. Board members, what we will be doing today is running you through the budget book that you have in front of you that contains the tentative 2016-17 tentative budget. As you're aware, we've had, I believe, 3 or so budget meetings to develop the budget. This is sort of a culmination of those meetings in addition to our compliance with Florida Statute 200, the Truth in Millage Law, which requires that we advertise the budget, which we did on Saturday in the local newspaper, as well as having our public, as Dr. Rendell mentioned, having our public hearing this afternoon for the first public hearing on the tentative budget. So with no further ado, I'd like just for you to reference, because I'm going to be referencing the budget book that you have in front of you. And I'd like to start, if you will, on page 3 with the trim notices and tax rates. So on page 4 is a budget, what we refer to as a budget summary, which has all the culmination of all funds: general fund, debt service, capital, special revenue, internal service, and enterprise fund. We actually also attached a copy of the newspaper clipping to the back of this presentation that you have in front of you. At the appropriate time, I'll just kind of walk you through and show you that what we're going to be seeing this afternoon during the first public hearing. So it is actually a repeat, if you will, of the same information. On page 5 is a notice of budget hearing that was advertised in the paper due to the prescriptive calculations that are set out by the Department of Revenue. The proposed millage for 2016-17 is actually less than the rollback rate. So as a result of that, we advertised under law a notice of budget hearing, which is in this room this afternoon at 5:01 p.m. The next on page 6 is, again, a copy of the advertisement that goes out for capital outlay. That is also a requirement in statute that shows our expected revenues and the various categories in which we expect to spend capital dollars. On page 7 sort of begins the general fund. And on page 8, it shows, as estimated by the ad valorem estimating conference of the legislature in January of this year, the estimated taxable value of property in Indian River County that is subject to the school board's levy. And it shows in the red, it shows up until from 2000 to 2008, roughly a run-up in real estate prices, so to speak, and values, and peaked at $18.421 billion in 2007. And as we all know, we had a severe decline due to the recession. Those are the 4 bars in red, and bottomed out in 2012 at about $13.5 billion, and we've kind of been on a slow recovery since then. On page 9, on line 6 in red, that there should not be a dollar sign there. That should just be mills. If you could just strike that through for me, please. So the required local effort as set by the state is 4.562 mills, which is lower than the prior year's millage. Prior year's millage was 7.955. This year's millage is 7.410. And we try to show the impact to a property owner, in the second block from 7 through 14, we show that if there was no change in property values whatsoever, then as a result of the lower millage, this property owner would be paying $95.38 in our example. And in the block from 15 through 22, as a result of the 3%, although real estate values of, according to the property appraiser, have increased by 6.59%, the Save Our Homes caps it at 3%. So this taxpayer would be paying approximately $50.92 less in taxes as a result of the lower millage plus the cap. On page 10, it shows you the allocation, the personnel allocations in the system for each fund, the general operating fund, federal food service insurance, and the extended day fund. Those are funds that have personnel allocated and paid for out of those funds. On page 11, we show a historical perspective of student enrollment, FTE from 1997-98 through the projected in 16-17. You'll notice at the bottom in projected 2016-17, we actually show a loss in students, and we have discussed at our previous budget meetings the underreporting issue that we had with our FTE, which resulted in a lower projection for 2016-17. But we know as of the fourth calculation, which is the February count, in the current year, we reported 17,656. So we know that we expect that in October, when we count the students again, then we would actually recoup some of those funds as we've discussed before. Page 12 just shows you a graphical display of the same information in terms of the growth and the growth of the school district as a whole, and also in a bar chart. Page 13 gives you the FTE history by program. And just to point out a little bit in the ESC in particular, you will see that in the first block, but this second section that says total exceptional, in 2004-05, we reported 3,389.24 total ESC students, and today we show 3,000 recalibrated, 3,182 students. For level 254, you can see we had 110.34, and that dipped for a while, and then you can see the resurgence, if you will, to today's recalibrated 2015-16 in 254 of 121.87. I thought that was just an interesting trend to show. And on the bottom block, on the very last, second to last line, where we have additional add-on FTE, that additional add-on FTE you can see has increased from in 2004-05 of 94.68, and as the state has invested more funds in career and professional education, they have increased the FTE for AP, IB, those kinds of add-on programs, then we have picked up an additional weighted FTE in those categories. On page 14, it shows the 2015-16, as I mentioned, the fourth calculation, which is the February count. And on line 1, you can see we reported 17,656.46 FTE. And as a result of last year's issues that we had, we could only project 17,373. So that 283.46, we know, as we've discussed with the board through our budget meetings, is that we won't be funded for those students until we count them in October and we receive the funding for them in January when they do the third FEFP calculation for 16-17. So at the bottom on line 32, you can see that there is an increase of $341,966. That may not look familiar to you because when the state legislature does their budget, they use the third calculation from the prior year versus the conference report, which showed $1 million increase. But because we know we had an increase in students, that shows that the increase has actually decreased. On page 15, we show the program weights or cost factors that are applicable to each fund. Just to point out that all cost factors in the basic education, 101 through 103, 111, 112, 13, have all decreased in their program weights. And on group 2, only ESOL and special education 255 have increased in their weights for the 2016-17 years. ESOL went up by 1.19%, and 255 special education increased by 2.24%. On page 16, it shows our estimated revenues based in the proposed budget for 2016-17 versus currently what we have recorded on the ledgers. As you're aware, we are still in the process of closing out the books. As of June 30, the final superintendent's annual financial report will not be presented to the board until September the 9th. The due date by the Department of Education is September the 11th. So we're still closing out 15, 16, doing accruals, getting our financials together. But the proposed 16-17 budget is the revenue side is estimated and shown in the column that shows the proposed budget. Of interest, I'd like to point out, if you could pull the handout that says 2016-17 Florida Education Finance Program second calculation. And on page 3 of 47, shows that the first calculation, which is based on the FEFP conference report for Indian River, and I believe you have a highlight beside it, was $125,310,207. Based on the shift in the millage and the adjustment in state funding, the second calculation, which is essentially your budget for 2016-17, is $126,371,326. So we picked up $1 million there. Why that is relevant, on page 16 of your budget book, if you look at line 6, you will see that in the increase-decrease column in the FEFP, there's an increase of $3.721 million. And on line 17, you will see a decrease in the local school tax of roughly about the same. Actually, it's more in state funding than what we have in local taxes. So you can see that the shift, if you will.
Yes, go ahead. I was probably thinking the same thing.
Okay, so what you're saying then is that even though it seems like we got a 3.7 million increase, in fact, there was a decrease at the local level, which pretty much makes it a wash. So the only net is 1 million? Or is that nested in that too?
It's nested in there, but if you were to isolate those two numbers, it's about $500,000, roughly $600,000 to the good, so to speak.
Okay.
So we've had some conversations in the past about the fact that the legislature did not make up, during the legislative session, the difference between the local property tax by buying down the millage. You can see the shift and the replacement of some of those dollars in the second calculation.
Okay, thank you. And I was, as you were, doing that, that's the same question that I would have just wanted to point out. And I wrote it down, but I'll save it on page 9 of the budget book. You don't have to go to it, but I think it's a clear point to really restate this for the public, that the required local effort is determined not by this board. This is the only legislative board in Indian River County that cannot declare a millage rate for local effort. All other boards can, not that you want them to or that they would, but this is the only board or legislative board that can actually increase the millage or decrease it. We are mandated by it. If you could just I know I ask you every meeting, but
Okay.
please recap because
There-
it's important that the public knows this.
There is a handout that I believe you have that is dated July 15th, certification of the 2016-17 school district millage rates and prior period funding adjustment millage, and it's in your handout. You should have that there. And on page 1 of 5, it shows you the required local effort millage that the school district must levy. So to say it in crude terms, district staff nor the board, we do not calculate what that millage is. It is sent to us by the state to be levied as part of the FEFP program.
And I find that important because the county commission is raising the millage rate, where you have a household budget or any budget, and you have a budget come along and you have needs and prices go up. And as these other legislative bodies can do so, we cannot. So that's why you may see referendums or other ways for funding. And I think it's important that the public knows that our hands are tied on the local effort. Thank you.
So the next bulk of pages, if you will, from page 17 all the way through page 96, we have detailed, on a very granular level, so to speak, information for school and department and statistics. We did this expanding the budget book several years ago to make sure that the public had full knowledge of exactly what makes up each budget area for each school and department. When you look at the variances between the 2015-16 current expenditures and the 16-17 budget, there are a few things that you need to be aware of when you're trying to do a comparison. Firstly, the schools, they're based on FTE projections. So if a school projects less students for next year, then obviously funding will decrease. We have not closed the books on the 15-16 expenditures yet, so those are still being adjusted as bills come in and we try to finish up our accruals. It does not include school recognition bonuses right now. Those dollars are held in reserve. We know the grades have come out. However, we do not know at this time what the state allocation will be for those specific schools. So those are just held in reserve until we get that information from the state. It also does not contain teacher lead. Teacher lead, again, is held in reserve. The statute allows us by September 1st to essentially see who's on board in terms of your teaching staff, and then we take the steps necessary to distribute those funds, and they have to be fully disbursed by September 30 to all our teachers. So obviously we're not at September 1st yet, so we're holding those in reserve until everybody comes back and is on board. We know a lot of who are coming back, but your new teachers haven't obviously been in place yet. It does not contain any terminal pay in the specific, I'm sorry, go ahead, please.
Yes, just for those who may not be familiar what teacher lead is, could you tell us what that is?
Thank you.
The state provides a supplement to teachers for the purchase of classroom instructional materials. Teachers typically use those funds to purchase classroom materials. And the state provides that. Actually, it's one of the few states I know that does that for teachers in order to make sure that they have the relevant supplies that they need.
About how, follow up, just about how much is that usually in dollars?
$250, yeah.
$250.
It's about $250.
And can we clear up, there was always an issue that the money would follow after the school year. How did we solve that? We were going to use those, I don't want to say debit cards, but cash bill. Can you please explain that as well?
When we first started doing this years ago, we used to use cut accounts payable checks. And as a result of that, There were teachers that said, I don't want it. There were some teachers that didn't cash it in time. We had on our books a lot of outstanding checks when you do your bank reconciliation. So what we did, based on also on board's input, we last year distributed those monies directly on the payroll checks. So that went out lickety-split. It was put into the payroll accounts, and then we had some follow-up accountability and conversation about making sure that those funds were spent on time. One of the impetuses for making sure that we had appropriate documentation was a visit by the IRS. I forget which school district it was now, maybe Washington, if I'm not mistaken. That they wanted to make sure that the school district had records and the teachers had records of how those dollars were spent. So we are also in conversation with Office Depot at this time as well. They do offer a discount card and method of tracking and making sure they assist the teachers in receipt tracking and things of that nature. So we've had some conversation with our union president and how we want to roll that program out.
So will that roll out before school starts?
As of September 1st, once we get that list of teachers, then it kind of gets everything rolling at that point.
So when they start August 10th, and I understand, but it
Right,
has to be clear
so-
because the teachers are slighted in a way, but they will be reimbursed.
So this is how the payroll check solves that problem. It's cash into your payroll, so you can reimburse yourselves for things that you bought in the summer, because teachers typically buy their supplies in the summer, or during the sales tax holiday in early August. So that helps to solve that problem.
Great, thank you. Ms. Jimenez?
I have a specific question about the budgets for the high schools. And I noticed that for both high schools, we're either doubling or tripling the amount of the FTE for advanced placement and for advanced placement and for the career vocational add-on FTD. And like in Vero, it goes from 83,000 to 727,000. And then the advanced placement in Vero goes from 248,000 to 892,000. Can you talk a little bit about what's happening there?
Yes. I actually have a handout for that.
Handout for him.
However, what you're seeing there is primarily the roll forward of unspent dollars from the prior year that are coming over into the budget for the current year. Florida Statute 101169 specifically says that at a minimum of 80% of what is generated by those programs at that school must go back to the school. So we roll that over back into the budget so that the schools have access to those funds in order to spend it.
Okay, so that is a lot of cash.
Yes.
So is the plan, tonight we have an item on the agenda to increase specifically the success of African-American students taking advanced classes, for example. So are funds from that going to be used to support programs that are going to allow those students to be successful? What would those dollars be used for? That's a lot of additional cash. And there's so much need for our students that are not successful in these classes.
That would be more of a programmatic decision, so maybe Mrs. Dampier or Dr. Rendell could address that, but that is more of a program decision programmatically.
Right.
So the cost for the program that's on the board agenda tonight is not affected by those funds. Those are school-based funds supposed to be used on the programs at those schools. Typically, those funds will be used for training for the teachers. AP, IB teachers have to go to training periodically to maintain their certification and teach those courses. Incentive programs, other things that we can do to encourage students to enroll in those courses. We'll be using those funds for that.
I'd just like you to keep in mind, it's, 600,000 at one school when we have so much need for children that are struggling academically. And I understand that we have site-based management, but we're also under DSEG, and there should be an incentive to use laser focus to move those students to success. So I know that that's kind of in the weeds, but I just think it's significant, when we say we don't have enough funds for these types of programs. So I just wanted to put that out there. Thank you.
Thank you. While we're talking about funds and different fund balances and how we fund things, I noticed that
Could you repeat the question for me? I'm
Sure, it's
sorry.
under general fund.
Okay.
And next to that column is debt service, which is a separate fund, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so we have a debt service line item within the general fund. Is that the TAN? Is that the
Service
thinking?
line
And
item.
why wouldn't that come out of our
Yes.
debt service fund?
That is correct. That is the reservation of the $100,000 for the possible TAN that we'll be looking at for 2016-17, based on the fact, several items. We know that we're not going to be funded for 289 students until January of next year, essentially. We know that we're burning cash in the insurance fund to cover that deficit. So they're just two of the examples. The reason why that's there in the general fund and that line, it's a requirement by the state accounting, we call it the Red Book, which prescribes where those types of expenditures must be recorded.
Okay, thank you.
Just to also point out, when you're looking at the variances for the schools and departments, for 16-17, it does not also include funding for the best and brightest at this point. It does not include terminal pay for exiting employees. Again, that is held in reserve until people actually resign or exit the system. Summer school funding is also held in reserve at this point once we determine where the locations for summer school will be for 16-17. We also hold that in reserve. And it includes, as I mentioned to Ms. Jimenez, the roll forward of purchase orders that we have on hand as of June 30. We roll them over into the next budget. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Can you give us a number or tell us where in the budget book we can find the amount that is the holdover for terminal pay? How much do we have to have in liquidity for that?
It is actually in the
possibility?
reserve accounts, and I will show you just a moment. If you look on page 81, 81, I'm sorry. Project 094.
Ah.
It's a terminal pay.
All right, so that's 750,000.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
And while we're discussing, or a moment ago, discussing the high schools, it also includes the positions for the graduation coaches that were recently approved. So when you're going through and looking at the variances, there are some things that have not been inserted yet from the prior year. So when we were going through the book and getting it together, we unfortunately had some printing problems. And I'd just like to point out a couple of them for you just to make sure that you have the correct numbers. On page 55 at Sebastian River High School,
Column wasn't big enough.
the column wasn't big enough, yeah. So you will see under Project 000, non-discretionary salary. You can see that we had that little doohickey there. That number should be $8,431,840.85.
Thank you.
And at the bottom, it should be $10,834,453.16.
What was that number again?
$10,834,453.16.
Or you can just take 2015, 16 current and add the variance.
That's what I did, actually, to get that number. Unfortunately, the same thing happened on page 67 at Sebastian Charter Junior High School. And the total should be $1,742,646.25. On the next page, page 68, Imagine Schools. The base funding number should be $4,643,378.91. Class size reduction should be $1,005,116. 1005116. And the total is $6,194,123.32.
This will be corrected for the website.
Yes, we'll correct it on the website, yes. Just a few things to point out as we go through the departments. On page 73, this is the reading allocation dollars that we receive from the state. Page 73. And you can see a decrease of about $150,000. That is as a result of now charter schools are eligible for the reading allocation, so they now receive a pro rata share of that. On page, I'm sorry, go ahead.
On page 80, line item 556, where it says reserve for TAN costs under general operating budget, I don't see that 100,000. Am I
That's
using those two?
that. If you look at the top header, it says expenditures.
Ah,
So the
okay,
budget is
thank
on
you,
a
sorry.
separate page.
All right.
On page 76, this is the superintendent's office. The lion's share of that increase is the roll forward of the Naviance 5-year contract. So we encumbered the full 5 years, and last year was the first year. So we are just rolling forward that purchase order to pay for the remaining 4 years. If you were to subtract that $149,000 from the increase of the $138,000, so you would actually show a decrease of about 11 or so thousand.
Can you remind us what the Naviance contract is for those?
Sure.
who may not
Sure,
know?
so the Naviance contract, we approved that purchase back in December, and that's gone into place at our secondary schools. Naviance is a software program that is almost like a virtual counselor. It provides a lot of services to the students, career interest inventory survey for them, all kinds of resources about how to pursue different careers, what colleges have majors to support those careers. It's actually a tool that our guidance counselors will be using grades 7 through 12 with our students, and also includes a follow-on component that tracks their progress in college. So we will know how our students are doing after they leave us. So it's quite a beneficial tool for our students. Parents have access to the program, the website. They can track their students' progress, and there's even a component that helps them fill out college applications and that kind of thing, but also a career and technical site that shows them various careers in the career, that are available in career and technical fields and how to pursue those. So we entered into that contract back in January, so we have that service for 5 years.
Thank you.
Page 77, right next door to it, you will see line 560 in view. As part of the budget reductions that we had this year, we eliminated that. That was only a one-time expense for some marketing that we were doing. So we reduced that, eliminated that cost as part of that. Page 78, I will slow down a little bit to delineate everything that we have reserved in the district-wide services budget. Line 000, non-discretionary salary. 2016-17 estimated budget is $3,583,400. It is broken down by in the following manner. We have $81,000 for supplemental pay for bus drivers. In your collective bargaining agreement with the CWA union, We pay for degree supplements, tool supplements. They get an additional supplement for checking the bus prior to going out on the road, that kind of thing. We also have $16,600 for the Protex group for those employees who are eligible to go up onto the next tier. That's about $16,600. We've also budgeted $1.5 million for teacher substitute costs. There's also $1,790,800 for the agreement with the IRCEA through the collective bargaining process for an increase of $900 on each level or step of the salary schedule. That's your 3-year contract. This is, I believe, the second year that we're going into that, plus a performance pay reserve for performance pay for teachers of about $835,000. And finally, $195,000 for the increase in the FRS rates that the state has increased the rates. The next line is Project 036, consulting/legal fees of $615,000. The variance of $130,000 is a roll forward of unused purchase orders that we had in 15-16 that were not used. So we kept that in the budget in case for this year we have any issues that we need to address. Line 84, 084 dual enrollment. That is a reserve from the add-on FTE that the state provides for the dual enrollment of students. High school as well as our high schools. Line 503 is the Multicultural Achievement Plan. We have reserved $80,000 for that. Line 505 and line 506, you can see in the variance column, it's just a switch between odd year and even year summer school. If we have summer school in an odd calendar year, we use the odd year summer school project, and in the even year, we switch it around. It's just one of the nuances of how we track summer school costs. On line 515, turf management, that has been moved to the physical plant budget. Line 551 is performance contracting. As Dr. Rendell mentioned, if you could hold your questions until after this presentation, we actually have an update from FP&L, and I believe Con Edison will be joining us as well this morning to give you an update on performance contracting. But that is the principal and interest payment that is due, I believe, in April of next year. We also mentioned line 556 for the reserve for TAN. That's where it is, Mrs. Jimenez.
And go back to 554.
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry, I missed 554, my bad. Line 554 is the transfer from the general fund into the insurance fund of $1.75 million. That is sort of the first payment over 4 years that we hope the state approves for the covering of the $4 million deficit as well as the $3 million safe harbor requirement. In conversation with Aon, our consultants, they have advised that the actual filing with the state Office of Insurance Regulation will not begin until we have finalized our financial reports. That we do not know, and just to repeat it for public knowledge, that it is unprecedented that they would allow both the safe harbor and the deficit to be paid off over that time period. However, in our preliminary conversations, they have said no. However, they would want to see more details. I believe it would be something in the order of a board-approved plan and a commitment to make sure that we pay off the deficit and the safe harbor over time. So we will just have to wait and see what the state says with respect to that.
Question. So is the amount we're reserving based on a 3-year or a 4-year payback?
4 years.
Okay. So wouldn't it be a little more fiscally conservative to assume, to set aside the 3-year?
If the state, yeah, it would be, yes, that would be correct. That would be about $2,033,000. That would be correct. If the board so desires, we can amend the budget for the final hearing in September to reflect an increase for a 3-year plan, if the board so desires.
I think that would be a good idea because, and I know that everyone hasn't spoken, but it's unprecedented, and, we're better off if we plan for the bigger hit and can go back and say, wow, we got the 4. But I think it's more difficult when you've, set all these amounts aside, and then they might say no, and then you're trying to scramble to make it happen. So I would agree with Mr. Frost's recommendation on that.
I have,
We will do
well, wait a minute,
I'm
you
sorry.
have to have consensus.
Yeah,
All right, let's
Take 3.
just realize that. And I'm not disagreeing with that, but I've never known anybody tighter than Mr. Morrison. So do you have an indication that we might get to 4 years? I've never noticed him to be like that, so I'm just curious if he knows something we don't know.
No,
Okay.
it's just conversation at this point, and as I've said before, they did not say no, which opened up, there may be a possibility, but I do agree, the rule of conservatism does say you plan for the worst hit that you can. So from that perspective, at least, I don't know, the superintendent may want to weigh in, but I think that would be prudent. But again, it's the board corporate's decision.
So at this point, I'd like, Mr. McCain, would you like to comment on anything?
No, ma'am.
Mr. Sissi?
On that insurance safe harbor transfer, who do we actually owe the money to?
We would transfer that money from the general operating fund into the insurance fund to build up, to take care of the deficit, the current deficit, as well as meet the safe harbor requirement. So it's just from one fund to the next fund.
So we're $6.5 million out of balance in the insurance ballpark, and that's just to ourselves?
Yes. In one fund, we have obviously more expenditures going through the fund than we have revenues coming in, which resulted in the deficit. We'll get to that, but right now it's estimated to be about $3.7 million. We've kind of said 4 just to make math easy. So we have to take care of that deficit. Because we are self-insured as a district, we are also required by the state to have about 3 months' worth of fund balance to cover any expenses that may go through the fund. That's the other $3 million that we've been talking about. So if you take that $7 million and spread it out over 4 years, that $1.75 million represents essentially the first year.
That covers the hole that we're in.
It covers
What
both.
arrangements are we making so that from now on, we won't continue to build that deficit?
Right.
Increase premiums?
So there,
What plans are
Sorry?
you making, is what I want to know.
Increase the premiums, that's what
Yeah.
we can do.
so you want me to unanswer?
You can go first. Same
Um,
answer.
Our insurance consultants have recommended that there, and you'll see it in the financials when we get to it on that page, a 31% increase to ensure that we maintain and don't fall back into that deficit position. That has to be negotiated with CWA and IRCEA. Typically, what we agree on with our unions is what we implement for non-bargaining. So I believe the negotiation process has started. However, I'm not sure if we've traded paper or anything of that nature yet, but that has to be negotiated.
And do you have any more, Mr. Searcy?
I had
Sure.
one other question. On this reserve for the tax anticipation note
Yes,
cost.
sir.
When do we, that's to cover us from June 30th up through what month?
Based on preliminary numbers that we have kind of run right now, The school district, we have cash flows in ebbs and flows. When you get your tax money in November, you're flush with cash. We sometimes hit somewhere around $100 million depending upon our collections. However, before that, you hit a deficit, so you essentially run out of money. So the tax anticipation note is just a short-term note that's fully liquidated as of the end of the year. What I have done, or what we have recommended to the board, is actually to shorten the duration. We typically issue the note somewhere August, September time, just to make sure that we don't run out of cash, and then we repay it as soon as possible. So we cut down on that interest rate. Now, there's somewhat of a trade-off because it's not as attractive to investors, but at the same time, we do save on interest costs by shortening the duration. So, go ahead.
But my question is, when do we run out of cash?
October 15th this year is the predicted date. But again, that could change because we have assumed steady stream of payments, steady stream of payroll, those kinds of things based on our history.
Well, if we have this budget that's balanced, why do we run out of money? I don't understand. I mean, if you get the big cash influx in November and when the tax revenues come in, we've got a balanced budget. Why don't we have enough money to take us through the end of the year? I don't understand that. Cash
flow deficits are different from financial deficits based on the timing of when you receive your money. It's all about the timing of when you get it.
But we're going to get it. We're going to get it. We're going to get all the money that we're supposed to get before or right after the end of tax season, correct? Except for this stuff.
But you will get the bulk of your cash in November when the tax bills become due and people start paying. But prior to that, we still have obligations of the district that we have to pay those expenses, payroll, keeping the lights on, that kind of thing. So as a result of that, your cash will dip. And so that's what we're trying to make sure that we don't run out of that cash until you get your on October 14th, we won't have any, on October 15th, excuse me, we will hit that deficit, and then we will need to have that TAN in place to make sure that we have enough cash. On roughly about November 15th or so is when we will receive the bulk of our cash.
And it costs us $100,000 a year for that? And how much is
That was just an estimate based on the last time that we did one, which was around $13 million. So it's just a placeholder to make sure that once we run the numbers, all our financial advisor fees, legal fees, bond counsel are all based on contract. So that was just a placeholder to make sure that we have funding for that.
Mr. Bruce?
Yes. So essentially, if it's a 30-day working capital loan, if you will, what is our 30-day burn? Is it around 20 million something?
Roughly
Yes.
around that,
Just
give or take, yeah.
in my head? Okay. So it would be prudent for us to achieve a state where we have 20 million in working capital in reserve at all times, so that we know how to do this.
What that would mean,
I'm just trying to define the desired state.
And then we
What
always
would-
have money
right?
for things that we're not paying for, right?
Right.
I go back to Mrs. Simchek's comment about not being able to raise the millage rates. A, if we have too much of a fund balance, we could be criticized or overtaxing our citizens. The other thing with that is we will be taxing and sitting, and that may not be very prudent to do. And tax people if I'm going to take money out of your pocket, I'm not going to sit on it. I mean, there's a philosophy, and that's only just a philosophical thing. But I understand what you mean by the desired state for sure.
Well, I want to jump in. So I want to circle back that, yes, that's why it's so important that the public knows that people outside of this district, outside of this economy within this district, outside of our bills, our expenditures, and our needs, and our students' needs, makes the determination how our cash flow is. And that's sad. That's really sad. It's just astounding to me. And then I just want to focus, and we can jump in, but the original consensus building that we were looking at before, I just want to make sure you clearly understand that everybody has weighed in for the insurance funding.
So
I'd like to make a final comment on the TAN. the TAN is not something that is uncommon in the state of Florida. The need for a TAN, or the possible need for a TAN, is really a symptom or a side effect of how we are funded by the state. Most districts in Florida incur a TAN at some point because of the way we're funded. So it's not like we're not doing things properly. It's that this is kind of the nature of the beast as to how we're funded. And so we don't need one every year. You know, I think one of the culprits that'll force us into the situation this year was the underreporting of the FTE earlier this year. And so since we've corrected that, I don't think we'll have to face this in the future.
Yes, Ms.
Yeah, and, you know, I think that's really important to bear in mind, because since I got on the board, it took me a long time to understand how the state can fund this in such a poor timeline. And we have had to do TANs numerous times since I've been on the board, but I think it's important to realize that this is not a new phenomenon. This is not just that last year the government decided to intervene in our affairs. This has been going on for a long time, and there needs to be advocacy when we talk about going to Tallahassee or going to Washington, D.C. These are the types of issues we should be advocating for these changes, because we get caught up in so many other things, and this has been affecting us for years. And if you think about it, when you look at the way education is funded in a lot of other states, Florida is actually the example of how you fund, not based on small communities and their income, but you're funding for the whole county to have a more equitable, more fair distribution of those funds that do not depend on your zip code. So that is something that Florida does well, but unfortunately the timeline This is a partnership, and if we choose to, we can have elected officials that will speak up. Sadly, we choose not to. So I do think this is an unfortunate situation. I think it's a great idea if we could have a 20 million fund balance so we don't have to deal with it, but you can imagine all the repercussions of a school district having a $20 million, you know, we're just trying to be healthy now, and we get criticized all the time. So it's really complicated, but I think it's great to have the conversation and to look at all the issues. So I'm glad that that was brought up, because we never have talked about it.
And I just want to piggyback that sentiment, because you see in the local paper, you know, the public statement by the county commissioners that the county commissioners want to improve services, so they were going to raise the millage rate. We can't do that. If we want to improve services of our students, we want to, but we are, you know, tied with funds. And I think that, you know, that is not publicized enough, that they can do that, and we are stuck in that law, you know, so I have a problem with that.
Thank you. And I just wanted to clarify as far as sitting on $20 million before I get skewered. The thinking is that, you know, I recall very few things from my MBA, and one of them is actually that all financial and management accounting comes down to size and timing of cash flows. And we have a business model, if you will, that is seasonal. So it is not unreasonable to build up revenues, if you will, in our off-season, and then expend them during our operating season. So I don't think we'll ever get there based on what you said. It's a very astute observation as to how it would actually not work. But I agree with Ms. Jimenez. Perhaps this is something we should look at with the legislature as far as the timing of the cash flows. And you know, since they do have such input into how we do things and what we're required to tax and what we're required to spend, if you will. So thank you for clarifying that.
If I may, and this is just experience having been a superintendent in another state, this is a unique issue to Florida. The state that I was in previously, the state apportionment to the school district varied month by month. So, for example, in October, the state money coming to the school district was a significant amount. In November, they shorted us because they knew that we were getting local tax dollars in that month. If in, thinking about legislative priorities, if perhaps us or, the consortia that we're part of were to advocate for a differential month by month based on the way typical cash flows work in school districts, it could help most of the districts in the state avoid having to do a TAN. Other states have already figured this out. Florida seems to not have, and I don't know if it's a cash flow issue on the part of the state or the DOE. Maybe they don't get their cash that way, but I think would be something to look into, and this has been solved in other places.
If I may just make a final comment on this topic, there was a time when the state actually advance funded the FEFP. In the beginning of the fiscal year, they would send a form to you and you would check it off, and they would provide advance funding of the FEFP. That would greatly reduce the need, I believe, around the state for this kind of thing.
Well, and it would be the more fiscally responsible thing to do, so you're not always paying carrying costs.
Correct.
Thank you.
So continuing on page 79, at the top line 568, ProTech salary study, we've eliminated that for 2016-17 as the study has been completed for the ProTech non-bargaining group.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Speaker.
I noticed that I was going over last year's budget. That wasn't in the budget last year. When did that come about? I don't remember approving that, or how did we?
I'll have to look back, but I do believe it was included, sir.
In last year's budget?
Yeah, I'll have to take a look. Yes, sir, but I do believe it was.
Didn't show it in the book. I don't know.
That was one of the retroactive
I will-
motion, or initiatives that the board took, actions that the board took, wasn't it? Right,
And through an
I
amendment?
believe so.
I think, yeah.
Okay.
That's my
That was to
recollection.
Your
protect the
recollection.
leapfrogging.
Right,
Yes.
correct.
You know,
I
just
believe
to-
that may have been
We
passed.
voted on it.
Yes, we did vote on
on it.
it.
So
It
it
was
was one of
for the
those-
leapfrogging, the injustices of leapfrogging
Yep.
and salaries.
I just didn't see it in the budget, and I know you move money around. I know the shell game thing, but I didn't see it in the budget last year, and
No, it was a truly voted for thing. It wasn't a shell game. It was truly voted for by this board.
kind of weird.
Mr. Moore?
Yes, thank you. On line 598, sick leave buyback, we've discussed that one as part of our budget reductions. Based on our historical trend, we can reduce that by that $20,000. On page 81,
Oh, before you leave,
yes.
on page 79, for the last few years, we haven't had the course and credit recovery. I know that we've had issues with that. Is that something that is now in another budget, or is it something that we have actually made progress on?
Let me double check. It may be in curriculum.
Is that Project 579?
Yep.
Yes.
Because we did,
If you look on page 85,
okay,
We're doing virtual.
but I don't think that was very successful.
that's the curriculum and instruction department.
Okay. And that's still, okay, so that still is zero. Did that become online, and was that successful? I do recall there was conversation about that. Do we have any insight?
I believe the course and credit recovery was a site licensing fee, and I'm not sure we're being charged that fee in the current year.
ALS now, so I think
So-
ALS is ours.
Yeah.
But we do have a,
We still have course,
Yeah, we
we
do.
still have course recovery, yes, ma'am.
okay, and so where is that? Is that budgeted at each individual school? So will I find a 579 when I look at the middle schools and the high schools? I'm assuming yes?
I do not believe so, Ms. Jimenez,
Yeah.
but I can check into that for you.
Okay, because,
Are
I
we
mean,
using unlicensed software?
Yeah, because we use.
No.
No, we're not, no.
no, that's not what I'm implying, please.
And we
I'm just
still-
concerned about the program and the success of the students.
We still have the course recovery software available at the secondary schools. We're still utilizing it. We
Okay.
still have classes full of kids taking course recovery.
All right.
That's my spot. Yes,
80, are we at 85
81,
now?
81. Line 083, reserve for over and under FTE. We keep a reserve in the budget on a yearly basis for whether or not the students that we have projected materialize on the October count. So if they don't show up, we have dollars that we can send back to the state. That's line 083 on page 81.
Thank you.
Line 500, performance pay. We've actually this year moved those dollars into the salary dollars. So we no longer have a reserve in account. We just include it as part of the salary because that's typically where it ends up once the teacher gets a highly effective or effective score. It actually goes into their base salary. So we've just moved that as part of our salary estimates. Line 532, CWA contract, that is the recurring cost of the recently approved 39 cents across the board raise for CWA employees. We've held that in reserve until, once again, everybody comes on board and we're able to redistribute that. Line 539, Title I differentiated pay. We may be able to eliminate that as current contract language allows us a 5% cap on Title I funds. Typically in the past, we have reserved that for the spillover effect into the general fund when we didn't have the current contract language.
I will,
Go ahead.
will say, Liz will probably look at me, but that is still a subject of negotiations between us and the association, so that's not finalized at this point.
Line 562, career and vocational add-on. That is the reserve for the restricted dollars that is added on by the state. Once again, we held that in reserve until we're able to redistribute that based on the accounts that come in through the surveys. And on 596, we have discussed the 20% holdback that we have from the CAPE funds that for any costs that are not eligible to be paid for out of the CAPE, we will fund from the 20% that the district withholds and make sure that the program receives those funds.
So those funds, because when you look at the high school budgets, there's zero for that, so that's just because you
The counts
got
have
it
not
on
come in
another
yet.
account?
Yeah, the
and it
counts have
depends
not
on-
come
Okay, thank you.
On page 90 of the Human Resources Department, we do have a formula problem that unfortunately crept into the document. If you look at Marzano training on line 526, current expenditures is $36,100, estimated budget $36,100. The variance should be zero, so there is some formula problem we have there. However, the total estimated budget is the same. It's just the variance column. We're gonna have to fix that for the book. In the IT department on page 91, just to point out that on line 541 is the estimated budget for technology that we would receive from the 0.6. This is the final year that we're able to levy the 0.6 mills, and that is the portion that's dedicated to technology.
Got some numbers missing there.
And unfortunately, once again, we have that error there at the bottom for the total, which should be $12,633,098.64.
Mr. Morrison?
Yes.
Before you move forward, on page 87, for student services, can you remind us what the Safe Schools funding is for? It's a minimal amount, and we have zero budgeted for 2016-17. It just seems like Safe Schools is important, and, can you just remind us what that is?
As I recall, what the Student Services Department uses that for, I believe it's for bullying training that Dr. Martinez undertakes with our staff.
Okay. So there's no allocation for that for this year?
That would typically be moved from reserves if
Okay.
we fund it. So we get to page 97, that has the total appropriations comparing 2015-16 to 2016-17. And you can see that the schools, including charter schools, increased by 2.2 million, 2,201,005, and departments increased by 5,954,823. The lion's share of that is the reserve in the district-wide district-wide services account for roughly $5.5 million. So if you were to back that out, you actually would have essentially a status quo budget in the departments and an increase in the schools.
Yes, and can you remind us how that budgeting occurs? Do the schools themselves present you a budget and then a determination is made, or does the district come up with the budget and give it to the principals?
It's a combination of both. It begins and essentially ends with the FTE, the projected FTE. The schools turn in their projected FTE, and we run it through a formula that generates for all schools what their discretionary is, et cetera. We do, as mentioned earlier in some of our earlier budget meetings, that we have a staffing formula that we also run through based on the number of students. Kindergarten, for example, at the elementary school, we look at the incoming kindergarten, the exiting fifth grade. We also look at a variety of things in terms of how to staff the school. So a lot of that is so it's a combination of district-controlled as well as school-based input.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to jump in for a little housekeeping. I see that we've gone through a lot of this. Shall we wait for a break before the performance contracting?
Yes.
Thank you.
So on page 99,
Favorite.
just a moment, I have a handout.
That's what I was asking. Do you want to do it now? They're just going to finish up and then we're going to, but if you need it now, that's why I asked. Thank you.
So if you go to the last 8.5 by 14 sheet on the back, I'd like to break down, if you will, the fund balances as of the end of this fiscal year, which we are still in the process of closing the books, and take a look at the drawdown in the fund balance that you see for 2016-17, and attempt to explain why you see that number. So preliminarily, at this point, we're looking at a fund balance as of July 1, 2016-17, that has a non-spendable amount of $305,326, which is on page 99 of your budget book. Restricted is $8,157,570. Assigned, $14,706,165, and unassigned is $2,156,027, for a total of $25,325,088. By the state's measures of fund balance, they will add the assigned, which is the $14,706,165, plus the $2,156,027. So when we report our financial, we report our we turn in our financial reports to the state, they will add those two together for 11.96% fund balance. Looking into 2016-17, you can see revenues are estimated at 145, 259,971, but appropriations are 158, 775, 112, which swings the fund balance by 13,515,141 for a resulting fund balance in, as of next year, our projected fund balance, 11,809,947. So if you go to this sheet that I just handed out to you, on the right-hand side, what I have shown here is why are we drawing down the fund balance by $13 million? We have the roll forward of unspent restricted millage funds for technology of about $2 million. So those are funds that were received in the 2015-16 fiscal year that were unspent, that we put into the budget, that we will roll forward, and that's included in the IT budget that you just saw. We're also rolling forward purchase orders that were encumbered for items in 2015-16 for technology that will be rolling forward and liquidated during the fiscal year 16-17. That's the $1,507,033. We also have other restricted encumbrances. So, for example, programs like AP, IB, CAPE, those kinds of funds have purchase orders that they have issued for items that those funds will also be liquidated during the next fiscal year. And we also have roll forward of unspent restricted funds such as CAPE, IB, etc. of $2.3 million. As I mentioned before, Florida Statute 1011-69 requires that 80% of those funds be given back to the schools. So that is your $2,315,470. I'm not sure if you received this handout, but could you take a look in your
Yes.
packets if you have this dark one
What's
here?
in
That,
the
yes,
same-
that shade, correct.
Okay, before you go back, based on our policy of 5%, if you're
We
looking...
exceed the 5%.
Yes.
So on this sheet kind of goes to Mrs. Jimenez's earlier point. In the shaded section, this breaks down for you all the dollars that are in the restricted fund balance, that $8,157,570 right now. And the lion's share of that $8,157,570 is advanced placement, $685,180.94. International Baccalaureate, 112,272.28. Digital Classrooms, 462,283.53. And Career and Professional Education, 937,283.74. So this kind of goes to your earlier point, Mrs. Jimenez, that we do have dollars that are being built up in the fund balance. However, they are restricted dollars that really should be being spent on students. I believe with the new leadership that we have in the curriculum department, and that we will be addressing that in the upcoming years. So the portion of that drawdown, of that 13 million drawdown attributable is to restricted funds is roughly $6,374,986. So we have a remaining $7.3 million to explain. If you look down at below the yellow bar, so to speak, you will see that performance contracting, we have the principal and interest payment coming up. That will ultimately be recovered through the savings that are being produced. And again, we have a presentation to give on that afterwards, if you could just hold your questions till that time. The FTE adjustment due to the low projections that we talked about throughout all three meetings, that we believe that in October when we count the students, we knew that we closed the year with 17,656 students as delineated in the book. However, we were unable to project higher. We only projected 17,373. So we feel that that will also be recovered. The impact of the raises and performance pay, the insurance transfer, and also a programmed reduction in the fund balance that we have been discussing for the last three meetings, where we have closed out purchase orders below 90 days, we have cut back on discretionary, we have done things in the 15-16 school year to increase the fund balance in order to fund the budget for 16-17. So that reconciles basically your drawdown, if you will. However, the transfer is essentially not covered by continuing revenues. We've discussed that. And the impact of the raises also is a continuing cost. So I'm
Are
sorry.
you done with this handout?
Yes, for now, yes.
All right, so then I think we will take a break at this time since there's a few
Just
board
wanted to
members
make one
that need-
final statement
Oh,
on
okay.
16-17. For 16-17 and 17-18, actually, we've been receiving, and maybe someone can confirm this, we've been receiving information from Tallahassee that we should be very careful about committing to any increases in expenditures as a result of the status of state revenues. Budget cuts that have been given in the past by the governor are kind of coming home to roost, so to speak. So shrinking revenues are being seen. Senator Don Getz, before he left office, was famously quoted as saying the soup will be thin. It is indeed thin. So I just want to also recognize to the board that at a local level, we also have, this is the final year that we will be receiving the $897,000 that we loaned Osceola School District several years ago. So those funds will come to a halt as of the end of this year. This budget also does not contemplate a 31% increase in health insurance funds for any board contribution, so that's not in there. So just some things that are sort of swirling around, some beyond our control, going into the next 16-17 and 17-18 school years that Finance Council, for example, at Finance Officers Association was told that at best, next year we can hope for a 1% increase in funding, and that is if you're growing. So there is some concern at the statewide level that revenues will not be what they need to be.
Yes, ma'am.
And and it's kind of too late for this, but I think, given those concerns and so much uncertainty, it's hard to believe that we are not requesting the 0.6 versus the 0.5. That is so painful to hear. This should have been part of the conversation when we were having that discussion. Maybe you didn't know that then, and I don't know, but I just, I think it's a missed opportunity.
A little bit of history on that. When we first started looking at the renewal of the discretionary property tax millage, the outlook was not what it is now as far as funding for next year. If you recall, Mr. Morrison has shared at several of the earlier budget meetings that when the legislature first took a look at the proposed education budget, when the governor first put out his proposed education budget, it was much more than what we actually received at the end of the legislative session. I believe the governor's budget was a 2.41% increase, and what we ended up getting was just about a 1% increase. And so what we've heard from different financial groups and also from the Superintendent's Association, the State Superintendent's Association, is that they are pretty confident that the most we would get next year in the budget is a 1% increase, and it could be more like a flat budget for next year. So what Mr. Morrison is trying to convey is that money is tight already, and we had some financial challenges that we've had to overcome with the health insurance deficit and that kind of thing. And it's not going to get any more easy as we go forward.
Well, thank you for that explanation, because I'm sure that's a question that'll come up. So it's good to hear what the thinking is. Thank you.
Thank you. And before we adjourn, just so we're clear, are we projecting a 4-year or a 3-year on the health insurance payback?
The $1.75 million is based on a 4-year. However, board consensus seems to
Okay,
be,
so we
let's go,
changed it.
let's go to
Yes.
3.
Just-
We will, we
That's
will
why I went
amend the
down.
budget
Yes,
for.
we-
Okay.
I appreciate it. I just wanted to
Yeah.
revisit, make sure
Popular,
I'm
or
on.
board consensus.
We got direction.
Said we wanted to be more prudent.
Okay, great.
And I think they got direction.
Yes.
And what I would like to say is, would most definitely staff and board return to this room at 10:30?
Okay.
Sharp.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Superintendent's Workshop today. It is July 26th, and this is being televised. I'll turn this back to Dr. Rendell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We're going to talk a little bit about millage rates and also some other parts of the budget, but we also have some members from the various organizations that are working with us on performance contracting. So I'm not sure if we're going to do that right now, but Mr. Morrison?
Thank you very much, Dr. Rendell. Board members, as you're aware, this afternoon at 5:01 p.m. in this very room, we'll have our first public hearing on the proposed tentative budget and the millage rates. And I just kind of wanted to familiarize you with the presentation. Some of you have seen, most of you have seen it before. This year, in 2016-17, we're proposing to adopt a 7.410 millage rate as opposed to last year's 7.955 mills. So this year's millage rate is actually lower than last year's millage rate. Based on the Department of Revenue's prescriptive ways of calculating the millage rates, we have to compare it to the rollback rate. And as you can see, the rollback rate is 7.544 mills, whereas the proposed millage is 7.410. So we actually have a proposed millage rate that is lower than the rollback rate by 1.78%. We typically show what does this mean for a homeowner based on an example of a $200,000 home with a homestead exemption. In 15-16, this taxpayer would have paid $1,392.13. This year would be less at $1,296.75, $95.38, or 6.85% decrease. If the assessed value did not change. We assume here a 6.59% increase, but we cap it at 3% due to Save Our Homes. And again, last year it would have paid $1,392.13. This year, this taxpayer will be looking at paying $1,341.21 in this example. Would just be a tax decrease of $50.92 or 3.66% less in this example. So we're going to the first public hearing on the millage rates. The board will adopt the tentative rates, and then we go into the budget, and then we open up for the public hearing, and this is the comparison of 2015-16 budget versus the 2016-17 budget, which the lion's share of that is due to the capital projects and the infusion of the 2016 Series A and B COPs, which funded the repairs of the Citrus Bowl as well as the Beachland project. And then we'll have our public hearing. So you will see this tonight just to kind of familiarize you and remind you, refresh your memory. Will the technician change over to performance contracting for me,
Can I
please?
just ask you a question?
Yes.
Because there's been, only one person in the public talked about a lack of notice. Can you please tell, as you said, we've seen this before, and I want to, in my memory, I want to say June 26th, but I don't have your timeline in front of us. Can you tell us the last time
That we saw the
that we
millage
saw
rates?
the
We
millage
discussed the
rate?
millage rates.
We discussed the millage rate. It has been on
That was at the
televised
last-
workshops.
That was at the last budget meeting we had in early June.
Was it, okay, like June
Forget the date now,
14th,
something like that.
maybe?
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
June 28th, 1 p.m. workshop.
June 20th, okay.
28th.
1 p.m. workshop, and that
Yes,
was a
and bef-
televised workshop,
And
correct?
before that on May 24th, and before that on April 26th.
Sure.
And March 29th.
So it's a work in progress.
Yes.
And tonight will be the first public hearing on the work in progress at 5:01, correct?
Florida Statute 200, the Truth in Millage Law, requires within 2 to 5 days of advertising the budget, which we did advertise over the weekend, that we have to have the first public hearing, which we will be having tonight.
Thank you so much.
And do you know on which page it appeared in the paper of record, or if you have a clipping?
I have the actual newspaper in
Okay.
my office. If my assistant is listening to this, I'll ask her to just bring it in, and we have the actual newspaper.
Perfect.
We have
It's
to
on the
actually
TV.
keep that for the Auditor General to
Okay,
verify
good.
that.
I
we did.
saw it, I did.
Very good.
Thank you.
Some folks had difficulty finding it, so I just.
Mr. Searcy.
Yes, is the required local effort, is this the minimum or the maximum?
That is what the board must levy under law.
At the minimum or the maximum? Can we increase that?
No, sir, you may not change it.
Okay.
There we go.
There she is.
Ooh, she is so good. Well, let's give her a round of applause.
Another benefit of open televised meetings.
Yes.
Can you just pass it around for me, please? We asked for it to be prominently placed in the newspaper, but sometimes we compete for space. But-
Oh, my.
Pages 12 and 13.
That is expensive. Can we just say that being transparent
Yes.
does not come cheap?
But we do have to keep that for the Auditor General to verify that we did meet the Budget Transparency Act.
Wouldn't it be nice if the paper donated that to the non?
So up next. is-
Actually,
I'm sorry.
I'm going to interrupt you one more time. So to kind of, I don't know, summarize the last few statements about the rollback rate. You know, we just talked a few minutes ago about how this is a lean budget year, and, you know, we didn't get much of an increase in the budget from the state. Well, then why wouldn't we increase the millage rate? We are not allowed to do that. That rate is set by the state, as Ms. Simchick pointed out earlier today. So these millage rates that we're going to talk about this evening, these are all prescribed to us by the state.
Just wanted, there are some that we could lower, but we're already taking the max.
Yes.
Like, you know, so we can't,
can't
there's a
increase
couple
them,
of line
correct.
items we could lower, but we take the max. And being that we're set and it's a lean year, why would we do that?
Well, isn't it in statute that we could go to the rollback rate, which in this case would actually be an increase?
It would be an increase.
advocating
If you were to lower the required local effort, then you may jeopardize the formula in the FEFP and the funds that have been allocated in the state's budget. Legally, I'm not quite sure that what the implication would be on a legal perspective. The .748 local discretionary has been calculated by the state as dollars that you are to raise. Although it says discretionary, it really is not. It's part of the overall state budget formula that they assume everybody's going to levy that. The 1.5 capital outlay is the maximum. Typically, we do levy the maximum, but you can lower that if you want to. That is your flexibility. The voted millage was voted on at 0.6. So we have no flexibility to say, let's do a 0.5 or a 0.4 or something of that nature. It's what the voters said, we are willing to pay a 0.6. So it's a very narrow issue.
So wouldn't a good headline be school district forced to lower their millage rate based on a forced mandated local effort? But that's just, I just want to make sure that's clear. Go ahead.
Yeah, I got a question too on that, and, you know, the answer, I'm glad we're talking about it, because the answer is that we have no control over that one. We do have control over the 0.6, and we can lower the capital outlay, but, you know, that one we have no control, and people don't seem, you know, it's hard to understand because we keep saying that we vote and vote and vote, but there's a lot that is not within our purview.
And a good way to put it is that they've even lowered the capital from 2.0 to 1.5, and we need to stress that. We used to receive 2.0 for capital improvement, and that has been lowered to 1.5, and of course, we take the maximum on that.
Right.
So that's.
And on
thank
top
you.
of that, they lowered it, and then they said, well, if you like it, you can levy the tax.
Yeah.
So then it becomes, you
Our
know, the
problem,
board's
or our issue.
issue, so
Thank
it's
you.
complicated.
Point noted.
Thanks.
So in the general fund budget, we have a line item of $1 million transfer from the general operating fund into the capital fund, into the debt service fund, and to pay for performance contracting principal and interest payment that is due in April of 2017. So with me here today, let's get that going. Up. So with me here today is Mr. Rob Reesley from Florida Power and Light and Mr. Doug Hennon from Con Edison. And they're here to give the board an update on where we are with respect to performance contracting, some of the work that has been done, and some of the results that we have been seeing so far in our savings with respect to this program. Just to run, I won't go through bullet by bullet because I know we're kind of pressed for time, but we've been discussing this with the former school board and this school board over a series of years. And we did present on October 13 last year the financing and the associated costs, which were ultimately approved, and the projects were put into place. So I'd like to start off the presentation by Mr. Rob Reesley from FP&L to kind of give the board an update on where we are. Rob, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Morrison. I'd like to start by giving a very quick overview of the technologies that we've applied through this program. We had facilities at two sites that we looked at through FPL services. Oslo Middle School is one site. Very briefly, we retrofitted domestic fixtures to high-efficient water, toilet, shower, sinks. I replaced components with, the rest of it's pretty much HVAC air conditioning systems, air handlers, air volume control boxes, replaced and rebuilt significant systems, replaced 1 of 3 chillers that were on site, and did a significant amount of controls and balancing of the systems that were out there. The second site was Vero Beach High School campus. The measures there, again, predominantly HVAC, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. We also retrofitted over, 6,600 interior lighting fixtures alone, so significant lighting fixtures at that campus. Again, high-efficient water systems. Replaced humidity control units, and then the big gun there was to consolidate your large chilled water systems into a single plant. Florida Power and Light Service Territory and Vero Beach Service Territory are adjacent to each other, so we tried to locate that plant in the most advantageous electrical rates we could. And your high-consuming chiller plants are now there, and we're piping the chill water back to those systems. And then updated the control systems throughout the campus to accommodate those HVAC systems. The status of constructions were complete today with all lighting systems at the high school campus. All plumbing systems at both campuses are all complete, 100% complete. The HVAC systems, air conditioning systems at Oslo, all the air distribution, except for the controls, the final controls at Oslo are 100% complete. Oslo is about 80% complete today, and we're testing and balancing those as of now, and expect to finish those within the next month. The chill water distribution piping system for that central plant, the high school, and those facilities, all the pipe is in the ground and cleaned up for school start. We do have some safety fixtures around the campus. We met with the principal as late as end of last week to make sure that we're prepared for when school starts. So we have some valve boxes and so forth that still have to be installed. And the plant itself, the pad is being poured this week. Equipment's showing up on site. It's off-campus site, so there's no disruption to campus services. And that'll be built over the next couple of months. The graphic on the right shows during construction this year until the first quarter of next year, there are savings you're going to realize during construction. And what that shows is the green bar on the top shows your energy costs for those two sites had we not done this work at those sites. During construction, you recognize savings for the measures that we install. So at the end of this year, first quarter next year, the blue line shows where you expect to be on your energy bills progressing forward. So you'll have a reduced cost of the delta between those two lines. The status is, again, all the chillers and air handlers and distribution system Oslo is complete. All distribution and piping is done. Valve boxes and ancillary systems will be done at the high school campus. Central plant, as I said, will be completed this quarter with test and balance and chill water flowing by first of the year. And we're looking at a potential reuse of a couple of pieces of equipment that we have to pull out as a result of centralizing the chiller plant and chiller equipment. We're going to try and reuse those and help assess some alternatives for that as well, including the potential for other projects that we're doing for other folks to use some of that equipment to help out. Finally, this is about a $7.5 million project with $485,000 in guaranteed first-year savings. These are guaranteed savings to cover debt service. The guarantee covers excess of debt service. One of the indices that is commonly used to compare your schools against your other schools is your cost per square foot. Prior to these projects, your cost per square foot for the high school campus was about $1.61 per square foot. Oslo's a little over $2 per square foot. With the electric savings alone, and this doesn't account for operational savings and water savings, which are not insignificant, that will guarantee the savings to the extent that you'll drop that index down at the high school to $1.09 per square foot. and at the Oslo School to $1.48 per square foot. We project savings above those guarantees based on preliminary measurements. Again, we've completed water and we've completed lighting. Looks like about 9% excess savings at Oslo and somewhere around 13% excess at the high school. So we project those numbers to be a good bit lower than they are today.
Yes, ma'am?
I just have an information question. So can you remind us, when we look on that slide, the cost was 7.56 million in facility improvements. Can you remind us who bears the cost of that 7.56 million?
Yes, there's a debt service associated with this. The guarantees that are in place for the savings that you realize pay 100% of that debt service over term.
Mr. Frost?
Yes. And I know the answer to this, but what would happen if we weren't to see those savings?
On an annual basis, we have to reconcile. So there's a guaranteed contract in place that says that if you have a shortfall in any given year, as payments are due, we have to reconcile that difference. So if you owe $100,000 for next year's payment and you save only $80,000, we have to cut you a check for $20,000.
Very good. Thank you.
I have one more question before we get past that. On the lights and all over at Vero Beach High School, does this include the parking lot lights there at the campus? Do you have those under control now, or?
It's primarily interior lighting. So the 6,600 fixture count is interior lighting counts. There is some parking lot lighting that's being done as part of this project as well. It's predominantly interior lighting is the big savings piece.
I was under the impression somebody told me that this this performance contracting was going to take care of the issues with the parking lot lights over there, which we can't control, by the way.
And which issues are you referring to? I'm sorry.
Can't turn them on and can't turn them off. Seems to be a problem with that.
Oh, for controls.
Yeah.
I don't believe we're adding controls to the parking lot lighting. It's a technology change from current technologies to LED technologies.
Would we want, as the superintendent for safety, would we want the lights off in a parking lot?
For certain periods of time, we want the lights on for safety and security, but other times we would like them to be turned off. We are exploring some different control mechanisms for the parking lot lights to see if we can better command and control those.
What would be the times that you would want them off because of crime? I wouldn't know that you would want any of them off on a school. Maybe on a Walmart parking lot, but on a school, I wouldn't think of any.
That's true. They're on all of them.
Sorry, they're on all the time at Walmart.
Oh, are they?
Yeah. And there's a lot of crime in the parking lot.
Certain areas of the campus, though, we would want them
Want
turned
off,
off, but they're
okay.
not off at the present time.
Yes, Ms. Miller?
So, that sounds like a compromise. It sounds like this is a concern that's been brought up over and over and over. And finally, somebody actually asked the question, why do we do this? And we're getting an answer, and there may even be a chance that some of those lights will be turned off at some point in the future. So, great. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Doug Hennon with Con Edison Solutions. Keeping our update very simple, not going into all the details of what we are doing. Right now, our lighting, which actually did include some of the parking lot lightings, not necessarily the controls though, but the parking lot lights are going to LED on our side of the project. The interior lighting is basically 100% complete. The remaining 1% is actually the parking lot LED lighting that still needs to be completed. Water conservation with the high efficiency fixtures, we're 100% complete. Air handling unit replacement and refurbishment for Gifford Middle School is 100% complete. The building envelope improvements and insulation is 100% complete. New high efficiency transformers have been installed with that campus, 100% complete. The chiller plant redesign is actually up and operating. We have it at 90% complete. There's a little bit of insulation that we are still in process of doing that should be completed within the next 2 weeks. For the chiller plant and energy management controls are 95% complete, but that last 5% will have a big impact on savings as we get the scheduling and reprogramming done. For the actual results, I'm not going to talk hypothetical. This is actually taking what your 2012, 2013 baseline was, the actual utility data, and comparing it to this year. So it's real utility data. We had guaranteed on this project 1.5 million kilowatt hours, and financially, $180,000, $180,451 to be exact, for Gifford Middle School. The majority of the savings for this school are really focused on the chiller plant and the controls, which we're still not quite 100% complete. But as we started getting that done over the last 2 months, we've already seen 166,000 kilowatt hours, and we've seen $29,430 in reductions. That's without doing any adjustments for increased utilities. That's a straight utility bill comparison. If you just extended the 29,000, took 2 months, and said, well, multiply that by 6, that will be right at the 180,000 goal. But like I said, right now, a lot of the equipment's still running 24/7 because we're finishing up the sequencing and the programming. I'm expecting another fairly substantial step up and expect to exceed the savings that we had shown and guaranteed in the project for Gifford Middle School. For Sebastian River High School, the lighting is 99% complete. We're also pending parking lot, the LED lighting in the parking lot. Water conservation, high-efficiency fixtures, 100% complete. Energy management controls, 85% complete. Again, we have a significant number of the buildings still running 24/7 while we're getting the controls installed, and then the programming follows that. Air handling unit refurbishment, 90% complete. Variable frequency drives, 100% complete. Building envelope improvements, 100%. Transformer replacements, 100%. And then there is a scope that was slightly modified for the design for the air handling unit replacement. We have 60% design drawings, and we're going to work through the district, and that'll be done basically about the end of the calendar year. The equipment is on site, but we still have to go through the permitting and everything else, and then it's an issue of coordinating around classrooms not to affect the learning environment. On Sebastian River High School, I actually did some graphics on this. We got started in January or December, January for doing the lighting, and the graph to the bottom left shows the actual month-to-month comparison, and that's the actual savings that you see on the bills for the kilowatt hours. So over the first 6 months of the project, you can see as each ECM and more gets implemented, how the savings step up every single month. I do expect another step up once we have controls completed. It's going to get even better. But it is going exceptionally well. Over 1 million kilowatt hours saved comparing 2012-2013 year to 2016, just directly off the bills, no manipulation of the data, and over $40,000 so far during the construction period. Now you can see as the last 2 months are the highest, that kind of sets a precedence. If we took the last 2 months and the savings that we're seeing in just those months and multiplied by 6 again, we would be exceeding the savings on both energy and dollar savings. $40,000 so far, 35% of the dollar savings for an entire calendar year have already been realized just during construction. Now, even a little bit better news as we go to that, the savings are not adjusted. What that means is, with FPL rates, since the 2012-2013 base year, your utility rates have actually gone up by 6.9% for FPL and 6.4% for Vero Beach. If we actually did the adjustment, those savings numbers would be about $15,000 more. But I wanted to keep it as simple as possible at this point. And we also will use an option A guarantee methodology, which is slightly different than what I'm showing today once we get to the guarantee reconciliation, but you're actually seeing all the results on the bills. Now, I also did a little bit of weather analysis. How many people felt like this summer might have been a little hot?
Yes.
It's real, okay? I went to NOAA, the website. Go ahead and provide the website if you want to go and do your own research. Compared 2012, 2013 cooling degree days and heating degree days, which accounts for both your heating and cooling seasons. For your heating season, believe it or not, we were actually cooler by about 19%, which means you had to use more energy to heat. In the summer so far, it's 7.9% hotter, meaning more cooling is being required. So we're really in a worse case, and we're still seeing results that are going to exceed the expectations that were guaranteed during the preliminary and investment grade audit. So the numbers I really don't think could be any better. Everything is going phenomenally well. We're seeing the results on the bills, and it is looking fantastic for the district. So that's good news after following all the budget information.
Thanks. Well, just one comment. I'll be curious, I'll be interested to see how it is once you start cooling occupied rooms. I know that the ambient temperature is higher. However, there are a lot of BTUs thrown off by human beings, and you'll know that if you're ever here for the first 5 minutes of our meetings. And cooling the room down. So these are great numbers, and I certainly hope they hold up.
Yeah, and just to let you know, right now, we're comparing months that didn't have the bodies in from
Okay.
2012, 2013.
Great.
So we're comparing June to June. I'm not doing a blend for the year. We're comparing like month to like month for the information that we provided today.
Perfect, thank you.
So,
Mr. Searcy?
What is the building envelope improvements here?
There's very insulation. If we went back to the investment grade audit, we went and did an infrared survey in various places to find, well, where are you losing heat or cooling from the building? We added insulation, in some cases added caulking, door sealing, things like that around the building. And then, we do before and after infrared to make sure that it's actually sealed property to keep the cool in or the heat out, if you will.
Good, thank you.
So both companies have approached the finance department with respect to a phase 2 to this program. What they are requesting is that an investment grade audit be done just to see what's out there. There's no cost to the district and it's non-committal, but just to see, you may recall as part of the process for this phase that they went out, gathered data in the schools, we gave them copies of the bills, they were able to put data loggers inside the buildings, that sort of thing. So the request that they have at this point would be to kind of see what's out there for the remaining schools, if there's any other opportunities for savings. So with that, I would like to just, if I may, Board, Madam Chair, just ask for some sort of a consensus on whether or not we could give them the authority, which would be a board-approved item, just to see what's out there.
Let's go down the line. Mr. Searcy, would you be in favor of something that does sound
It's going to
interesting?
save us money, worth looking at, and it doesn't cost us anything?
There's no cost to the district for that, correct?
Mr. McKay?
Sure.
Mr. Madden? Mr. Frost, any questions? Or
I don't have any questions or
input?
comments, thank you.
I would be in favor of that study at
Okay.
no cost to
It's
the
just a
district.
study.
And based on these figures, why wouldn't you want information brought forward, at least? So I feel that it's a due diligence on our part. So.
Okay, we'll bring it forward. Thank you. Okay. Can we get the clicker? So going back to the budget.
But a segue.
It's fun stuff.
Good news for a while.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much, both Con Ed and FD.
We want to talk a little bit about the debt service fund, which really isn't exciting news, but on page 103, as we've discussed, in the current 2015-16 column, you do see a appropriations and fund balance amount of $53 million. That is, the lion's share of that comes from the infusion of the 2016 COP that financed the reconstruction of the Citrus Bowl, as well as the cafeteria and revitalization program in Beachland. For 2016-17, you'll see a federal interest subsidy. Just to remind the board what that was, in 2010, we issued a qualified school construction bond in the amount of $26.2 million. We issued the bond at a rate of 5.91%. However, we receive a federal subsidy back from the federal government of about 5.8% in a rebate check that we actually get. We've also taken some of the sinking fund requirements, and what that is the $26 million is due in a balloon payment at the end of the loan, and it is due in 2028. And so what we do is that we build up our fund balance in anticipation of that balloon payment in 2028. What we've also taken advantage of, as you may recall, is what we call a forward delivery agreement, which we're able to invest those funds that are in that, building up in that reserve, anticipating the payment in 2028, and are able to earn interest on those funds. And so therefore, at the end of the day, although we borrowed $26.2 million, we'll be paying back around $23 million in principal only. So the federal interest subsidy is that rebate check that we receive back from the federal government. The transfer from the capital projects, the $11,415,183, that is to meet your debt service payments, and the transfer in from the general fund of $1,041,296 is to cover the performance contracting principal and interest payment that is due. On the bottom section on expenditures, redemption of principal, you can see that $7,647,296 includes your sinking fund payment. On your handout, you should have this handout. I tried to give the board a layman's breakdown, if you will, of the debt that we have outstanding. So you'll see the original issues for the 07, 14A, 16A, and B COPS, as well as the 2010A QSKIB. You can see the principal outstanding is $100 million. I believe it was inaccurately reported as $133 million, and we have $100 million outstanding. And so you can see the interest and the amounts fully outstanding. The final maturities are listed on the right-hand side. So the 207 COP, there was an unrefunded portion that remained, which will be paid off by next year in July. So we have basically a year left on that. We have the 2014A COP, which is due in final maturity in 2025. 2016A is 7/1/27. 16B is 2025, and the QSKIB, as I mentioned before, is 2028. When you take the averages of the final maturity, it's about an average of about 11 years. So said another way, on an average basis, in 11 years, we'll be debt-free. That's on an average basis.
Is that your word, that we will be debt-free in 11 years?
On an average basis, sir, when you look at it. But here are the final maturities. So that covers the debt service. I'm sorry.
Ms.
Yes.
Jimenez.
So when we're talking about this, I think it's important to understand why capital outlay dollars are so important, because some of those dollars are already encumbered moving forward. And that is why any decisions that are made that impact capital outlay for the school district need to be reasoned and need to be justified, because that will cause problems moving forward if, for example, the legislature were to divide the way the capital outlay is being used, or they were to further reduce the millage. So I think that's something that is worth repeating over and over, because, you know, when changes have happened in the past, districts have suffered because they have these payments to make, or they have maintenance to buildings on top of these payments. So if you change your capital outlay income, it's going to have tremendous consequences for school districts. That's another legislative issue, advocacy.
So speaking of the capital outlay projects fund, that begins on essentially page 108 and 109. On page 108 on line 1, we show the impact or the revenues received from the 1.5 mil levy of 23,646,248, PICO maintenance of 463,410, CO and DS capital outlay and debt service is 112,971, state charter school capital outlay 662,140, interest 32,158, and other revenues, which are, I believe, fuel tax rebates that we receive, about $20,000. So total revenues and other financing sources about $24,936,927. On page 109, it shows the current status of the capital outlay budget as far as project encumbrances, which are projects that we've committed to issue purchase orders in the first column but have rolled forward, and in the second column, commitments that have been made but we haven't yet issued purchase orders against those available budgets. So for example, on line 068, you will see Beachland Expansion Master Plan. We've issued purchase orders as of June 30, to date, 331,278, but the remaining project funds of 7,335,450 have not been finally encumbered yet. As you are aware, we have not awarded the RFP nor the contract for that project as yet. It's on the board agenda for tonight's approval. On line 429, Citrus additional classrooms, $1,292,096, and we still have available budget of $656,382, which will roll forward into the new year. Same thing with lines 446, Vero Beach High School Citrus Bowl renovations, as well as performance contracting. On page 110, I refer to this as the new money. So this is how the $24,936,000 is allocated for 2016-17, and we have seen the plan. We've shared with the school board the planning document that details school by school all the repairs and maintenance that we have to do to all our facilities by facility. And just to point out a few, school buses and motor vehicles, we have about $1.3 million. That's about, I believe, about 10 or so school buses. I believe one of the school bus, usually it's about $100,000, but the ESE bus costs a little bit more because of the specialized equipment that they have. Portable leasing, $800,000. Those are our portable buildings that we house some of our students in. Playground equipment, you can see $350,000 is allocated for that. And floor replacements to tile district-wide, $323,317. We continue to remove carpet out of our schools and replace those with tile to improve the indoor air quality in our schools. On page 113, we get into the federal programs budget. And these proposed 2016-17 budget include the estimated roll forwards for those projects, dollars that we have available today, which, because these are entitlement grants for the most part, will be reallocated by the federal government back to us. The lion's share of the $11.259 million budget is IDEA, Individual with Disability, and also your ESEA Title I grants, or your larger grants that are in those funds. Questions? Moving on to the food service budget on page 119. Typically, we highlight that we have no increase in meal prices. We're holding meal prices stable. They're listed on the left-hand side, the bottom chart, all our meal prices. The revenues primarily reflect an increase in our USDA allocations, U.S. Department of Agriculture allocation. There's an increase of about $243,000. Your increase in expenditures are primarily for your salaries. As you know, that most of your food service staff are CWA employees, so the raises have gone into effect for them. Salaries and benefits, and you'll also notice on page 120 in the line for capital outlay, there is an increase of about $244,000. I do believe that the food service director is planning on replacing some of the aging equipment that we have in some of our kitchens. So there's an effort there to reduce this fund balance by about $1.3 million overall. One final comment before you make the question is food service is governed by the Code of Federal Regulations, and it cannot have more than 3 months' worth of expenditures in the fund balance. Typically, every year the auditors, they will do that test to make sure that we don't have that. So we knew we were kind of close to the line, so we're making some effort to spend those dollars down and replace some of the equipment. Yes, Ms. Amendment.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask if the price that we charge for lunches and breakfast reflects the cost, or if we subsidize that further beyond the free and reduced lunch cost that's a given.
My information may be a little bit outdated. However, I know that typically it does not cover the cost. We supplement the program by a la carte items that we offer to help the program along. I'm not quite sure if that has been changed, because I know we typically look at a meals per labor hour type formula to make sure that we're covering our costs, recovering our costs. And so I'm not quite sure which one is true at this point, to be honest. Dr. Fritz, you have anything to add?
I can research the question and give an answer for you.
Thank you.
because I guess my question is if we hypothetically charge for the meals so that the, you know, the expenditure of making the meal is covered by the price, that wouldn't affect students that have free and reduced lunch because they will be entitled to it regardless.
So let me piggyback that, then those who were not paying for free and reduced lunch will absorb the cost?
Well, you pay what it costs to make a lunch. I mean, when we go to a supermarket, we pay what it costs to buy milk. When I go to a restaurant, I pay what it costs, depending on the restaurant. Why shouldn't our lunches, why do we have to subsidize lunches? You know, even though this is a separate budget and it doesn't affect the general fund, that's all, I've always been curious about that. If you're not free and reduced lunch, you know, we don't subsidize your clothes, we don't subsidize your books, we don't, you know.
Well,
so-
we would get into, and I don't want to do this now, a philosophy that I'm sure other board members would jump in on how it's not monitored, and many people are checking off the box, and therefore many people who deserve it are getting it, and many people who can afford it are getting free lunch as well. And that's a burn, I think. So, you know, but I understand your
But I'd like to know the numbers.
Yes, I totally understand.
So, in response to your question, I will get that information for you. With regards to the differential between the price of a student paying for their lunch versus a federally reimbursed lunch, there are federal requirements, as I'm sure you're not surprised, that actually monitor that ratio between what the paying customer pays and what is the subsidized amount. And it's a very tight margin of differential that you can have there under the federal program. I am aware of that, and I know that we have been making efforts not to increase the price of lunches, given that our fund balance in this program is sufficient. I mean, you don't want to raise prices if you've got enough money in the fund. But I would need to defer to Mr. McCarty, and we might be able to schedule a session later on where we discuss this in more detail.
Absolutely, because one of the concerns in the past, and I know with the federal regulations that has changed, but we were doing that at the expense of selling a la carte items that were basically unhealthy for students. And so that was driving, maintaining that budget solvent. And, you know, I know moving forward that has changed, but I'm always curious about it and understanding the ratio. This is the first time.
Yeah, I
You know,
think
I
that's
ask this
positive.
question every year, and I never have gotten the response that there's actually a ratio between what you can charge and what that subsidy is for the free and reduced lunch. So that helps me understand it, and I appreciate that.
Yes, and I will say the a la carte items that we are selling are compliant with the federal requirements for healthy food. That's been a change in the last few years, and there was some worry about reduction in a la carte sales, and I think that has gone down. But again, I would need to have Mr. McCarty come to speak to the details on that.
Thank you.
And then we turn to page 124, which is the health insurance fund.
And so I thank you for inviting me to the table, Mr. Morrison. I'll present some general comments about the insurance fund. I think we've met 4 times about this already, but some of this is good news. But if you remember back in January, February, we were actually projecting what our ending situation would be this year. It turns out that based on the projections and the trend, we're exactly where we predicted we would be at the end of the year, which is at about a $3.9 million deficit. If you remember, we were a little bit worried in February because we had a high claims month, but the March, April, May, June claims have come in a little bit lower, and so we're right on that prediction, which is, it's not good news that we're $3.9 million in the hole, but at least we're on what we thought we were going to do, which means our metrics and our methodology appears to be correct in partnership with Aon. If you remember from our previous conversations, there also is a safe harbor requirement. This year, if you look at the numbers, to do the 3 months of reserves is $2.6 million, but with projections increasing in future years, over a 3-year period, that will escalate to about $3 million, 2.6 now, but with trend increase, it will be higher. So in the aggregate, we're still looking at about a $7 million need to replenish both the deficit and the safe harbor. I heard the board earlier speak to conservative budgeting and thinking about doing that over 3 years. at least in the budget, so we have a just in case. It is our intent to propose to the state that we do it over 4, but we'll see how that goes. I think it's good to have the money available if they don't approve the plan. And that's based on the 112.08 filing. As was discussed by the school board in May, we are keeping the 3 tiers that we currently have. We saw that as beneficial, and we made that recommendation to the board, mainly based on, well, A, stability for our employees, and B, being able to have an array of plans, some more affordable than others, so that our employees had an opportunity to choose a plan. And specifically related to our lower paid employees, they need to have an affordable plan that works for them. And so this allowed some choices. We also discussed the clinic on multiple occasions. As we've talked about, the cost of the clinic last year and the estimated cost of the clinic in the upcoming year is $1.4 million. If those same claims had been run through the Florida Blue Plan, it would have been a little bit short of $2 million. So there's about a $600,000 avoided cost, and we've talked about that several times before. And the decision was made to keep the clinic. Actually, the clinic is something where the other school districts that have done this and other organizations that have done this, they don't realize their full savings until the 3rd year, or their full avoided cost until the 3rd year. So while we're budgeting the same amounts as this year, we're hopeful that that will increase. Another piece of good news is that our trend on claims is about 0.2% this year over last year. And so the problem that we have with the fund is mainly an underfunding of it. We aren't putting enough money into the fund to cover our expenses, but the good thing is we could have had a 6-8% increase in trend this year, which we did not experience. We experienced a 0.2% increase. A majority of that was prescription drugs. Actually, we saw a decline in our medical expenses this year. Prescription drugs, as we've talked about before, have been increasing very rapidly. I think we're looking at about 12% trend in prescription drug increase, and that has proven to be a challenge with new medications, which are beneficial, obviously, to patients, but they're very expensive because they're proprietary. So in our estimates based on the budget, we're assuming an 8% trend in rates, even though we experienced 0.2 this year. Again, it's conservative budgeting. 8% is right now what the industry is predicting for trend for the upcoming year. Hopefully we'll do better than that, but we want to estimate worst case scenario. As far as premiums are concerned, we will need to do about a 31% increase in premiums. That's covering the 15 months over a 12-month period because of the new open enrollment period. We are in the process of negotiating how those premiums are borne by the employees in the district. As we mentioned earlier, there is not money programmed into the budget for that, but again, it's a subject of negotiation, so that'll be an ongoing dialogue with the board and with the unions. Even with the 31% increase, and we've showed this data in a previous meeting, it puts our total premiums on par with what other school districts are paying. We're right there kind of in the middle of the pack as far as what the aggregate premiums are. It's not making us the highest in the state, or certainly not the lowest, but it's right in the middle based on what we see in other districts. I will note a couple of lines on the budget, and they don't have lines on them, but I'll point them out to you. You will see that there is a $56,000 ACA fee. It's basically a tax for employers paid toward the federal government. That's not something that you would have seen several years ago, but it's something that we're being billed. $56,000 isn't a lot in the grand scheme of things, but it's $56,000 that could be going out toward our employees and their benefits. Additionally, you will see a significant increase in the cost of our stop-loss insurance. We do purchase annually stop-loss insurance so that if we have any significant claims that are really, really high, that it doesn't hit the fund. It provides us a degree of security, and for the same coverage, that amount is changing from $432,000 to $957,000. So there's a significant increase in that premium, and you'll see that in the budget. I do want to thank some team members for helping prepare the budget. As you're aware, our accountant auditor resigned rather suddenly earlier in the year, and so I do need to thank Mr. Morrison Amanda Brooke Cross of Aon, Stephanie Miller, who I think she's in the back row there, and Sue Titus for their assistance in preparing this budget. We didn't have the in-house staff, but I do want to introduce Melissa Moore, who is here. She is our new accountant auditor who started last week. We didn't offer her the opportunity to speak before you 1 week into the job, but you'll get to meet her later on. So I'm glad to address any questions that the board might have.
Ms. Jimenez?
Yes. Can you tell me about the Employee Assistance Program? I see that for the current year, there's no allocation, but for next year, there is an allocation, and I know that it is an active program, so where is that budgeted?
So Mr. Morrison just whispered in my ear, we haven't received the bill from last year yet, so the expense is not encumbered in the budget, but we continue to do the Employee Assistance Program. It's well utilized by our employees. And actually, it's something that is a nice feature in our IRCEA contract. We annually meet with the building reps to share with them information about the EAP so that the Teachers Association can share that information. We regularly refer people to it, and then we also do a training annually for administrators on the EAP to make sure that we're getting the word out there about that. It's a nice proactive way to support our employees and avoid problems that might happen for them.
So then
they encounter
it'll
in work and life.
approximately be 47,000? That's kind of the ballpark?
That's
for
what
that
we're expecting,
bill?
yes.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. So the millage rate, which is lower this year, during this hearing, we are not looking to raise it. So, but the budget itself, as it stands, we've had consensus earlier to budget for 3 years instead of 4 for the safe harbor. So in the mix, where would you find that extra 800? Let me divide 1.7 by 3 is 600,000.
The payment would be $2,033,000. We just have to take that from the general operating fund balance, and then look at maybe corresponding cuts to offset that additional transfer.
Okay, so that would come forward at the next meeting?
Yeah, we would still have to sharpen the pencil, as to Dr. Rendell.
I know we're going in the wrong direction, but as a board, we have to do this or discuss it, at least in the open. Now I need to discuss, I have to, is that we had based a 30, and I understand we have to be careful because negotiations are behind closed doors, but right now, at a 31% to our employees, and we've come up with safe harbor, and we've given discussion, and we have saved this discussion, but I want to throw it out. At 31% of a premium increase to our employees as a contribution, we are not budgeting it all for picking up any of that premium increase through no fault to our employees. I know you cannot, get blood from a stone. I understand that. But what would be, that would be, we'll go back to your statement, have to go back and reconfigure if we came to that point. If there was a board consensus, if it was possible, then this board would have to go back and we'd all have to configure how to absorb some of that 31%.
I think it would be best discussed in an executive session. as
Sure,
opposed to-
sure,
Yes.
but in the same respect, and so this is why I'm dancing around. It's best to discuss that, but we're not budgeting for it. So it's just a difficult position that we are in. It's not that we're not thinking about it.
No, that's,
Okay.
I'm so glad you brought that up.
All right, I just want to say that. It's just that those are things that are negotiated, but it's not that we're not thinking about it. But in the same respect, I want to make sure that I brought forward, I know the board got copies, that the county benefits are in the same position. They just found, they are going to be in the hole unless they raise their premiums, and they are, as of October 1st, and they will continue to raise. So it's not just our area. I just want to let the public know it is not just the school district. It's just that our notification was a little too late and too sad a circumstance, and I know we don't have to go back there, but I just want to say it's not unique to this county and to the trend.
I think that's accurate based on what I've seen in other organizations and municipalities.
Thank you.
And the final fund for the day is found on page 126, which is the Enterprise Fund, or the Extended Day Fund, which is your after-school program. Essentially, this is a status quo budget for 2016-17 moving forward. Slight reduction in the fund balance, but nothing to be alarmed about. And on page 128 and 129, we have put the budget calendar in there, so the public is aware of the workshops that we have had in the past, the 4 workshops, and today's meeting, as well as this afternoon's public hearing. The next public hearing will be held on September 8th at 5:01 p.m. in this very room, which will be the final hearing. And we will make the appropriate amendments based on board consensus today to reflect that in the budget. And on the last page, 130, is who to call for information. If any member of the public needs any information, we have the telephone numbers and the names and contacts listed. Unfortunately, Dr. Fritz stole a little bit of my thunder. I also would like to thank staff for their hard work and due diligence in preparing this budget. I'd like to specifically mention Mrs. Sue Titus, who kind of spearheaded the whole budget preparation process. Without her, this would not have been possible. I'd like to thank Kim Copeman, Donna Alderman, Stephanie Miller, and my trusty assistant, Lynn Justin, for putting it all together, as well as for the folks in the print shop who also printed the budget book. So with that, that will conclude the presentation for today.
Any questions, board?
Yeah, I do have a final question. You know, we had a discussion on page 8. You have the projections, you know, the trends that we've had in terms of revenue. And what we're seeing is that, you know, the trend is moving up. We are not anywhere near to the trends that we saw before the recession. And one of the questions that I've gotten from the community is that the community has already approved millage twice. We had that first 2 years, and then we had the 4-year extension that included the technology. And both times we had slotted 31 positions, arts, PE, librarians, and so forth, that could be lost. And so the question that I was asked was that if this is indeed a priority of the school district, why aren't those positions put into the general fund? This is the question. And because what the community is seeing is that this is going to be an endless request, because those 30, unless the economy gets better, but what we're hearing is not very optimistic. So how do we answer that? Because that could be a question that people want to know our thoughts on as they move closer to August 30th and voting for that initiative.
So
Do you
I'd like.
understand my question?
Sure, absolutely. I was actually asked that by a member of the media yesterday. First of all, one of the reasons I believe those 31 positions.
No, that's for the millage.
First of all, I think one of the reasons why those 31 positions, for example, haven't been folded into the general fund over the last few years is when we asked the voters to approve the discretionary millage 4 years ago, we said that's what it was going to pay for. So we had to keep our word that the funds generated from this discretionary millage would be spent on those 31 positions, on the technology, on the instructional materials. I believe if we had taken those 31 positions and folded them into the general fund and then spent that money on something else, we would have not kept up our end of the bargain. Mm-hmm. You know, at the end of each year when we publish in the newspaper the listing of what we have spent the money on, we want to be able to show that we are spending it on what exactly we told you we were going to spend it on. As far as going forward, we kept those positions in there because we felt 2 reasons. One, the community felt they were valuable enough to support in the past. We're hoping the community will feel they're valuable enough to support in the future. The second thing is if we're asking for additional revenue, 76% or is it 73% of our overall budget goes towards personnel.
67.
67% goes towards personnel. So if we're asking for additional revenue, why wouldn't we take some of that additional revenue and apply it towards personnel? So those are the 2 justifications or the 2 answers.
And I was going to say that all roads lead back to local effort is not in our control.
Right.
And we still have to keep the lights on and all those things. So I think that's great that it just keeps coming out to the public and through these workshops that you can't add 20 positions if you can never raise that bar above what they say, not what we what the reality is, so.
And I would like to add in my conversations with board members from around the state is that pretty much every district either has discretionary millage or a half-cent sales tax or something along those lines to fund education, because the state is willing to do their part, but, the difference is up to the local community, and I think that, in many ways, that's a good thing because that provides the local control we're looking for. So that when we ask the taxpayers locally who own homes in our district to share in the wealth with the education and the future of our nation, that, the 5 members sitting at this table and the superintendent are the ones who are spending that money in guidance with the way it was advertised and the way it was intended. So
Thank you.
in some ways, it's a good thing, but it's not an uncommon thing.
Sure. Thank you. And based on what happened, we were prudent, and that may be to our own fault, but I hope the public understands, even in our prudent measures, if education is important to them, hopefully they will, this is a plea to support our referendum, so.
And I totally agree. I just think we need to be prepared
Yeah.
for those types of questions.
Yes.
And I think when we're in front of the public via, audio, visual, whatever, that we have these conversations so they hear it from the superintendent, they hear it from the board members, and it's not secondhand, third-hand iteration of somebody's interpretation. So I'm glad that we were able to address that. Thank you.
Is there any input from the public?
Mr.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Mr. Searcy.
2 questions. We're going to have a public hearing tonight on this proposed budget. How has this information been disseminated to the public? Budget, especially this list of who to call for information, how has that been disseminated to the general public?
The budget itself was published in the paper last Saturday.
The budget, all the details of this?
Not all the no, not the budget book.
Yeah, but how does the public get a look at that?
This is on our website, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So they, including your list of who to contact?
This entire book is on the website,
Okay.
from
Okay.
cover to cover.
Ms. Jimenez?
I'd just like to follow up on, I mentioned this before, I think it would be in the interest of the school district to have copies of this hard copy in our public libraries for people that are so inclined to look at. Because if you think about it, look at how thick this document is. To sit in front of a computer and try to understand any particular budget or section that you're interested in, it's really, technology's great, but it's not great for this kind of stuff for older folks like me. Maybe the young kids get it. So I think that, that would not cost us, it would not break the bank, and it would show further transparency that you could go to your library and just look at these documents.
Mr.
In
We
the
do
old
have-
days,
sorry.
in the old days, that did happen. Back in 96 to 2000, we had it in the local libraries.
We do have extra copies. We typically try to estimate how many people attend, so we do have extra copies in my office. So if there's any member of the community who would like a copy, they're free for you to get one. We'll have a conversation, follow-up with Dr. Endell regarding disseminating those too.
And we also have, besides, I think that's healthy, I think you're right, Mr. Searcy. And also, we also have public records requests. If somebody wanted a hard copy, some people don't have computers, I'm still, and that's always, like any government, requestable. But yes, we want to make it, I think that's a great point, to both of you.
And I do have a final question, and this is just tangential to the budget. I'm still concerned in a positive way, or maybe that's not the right word. I think that the school district should have a plan for the unspent restricted funds that are attached to AP, IB, and some of those programs. I think given the needs that we have with achievement gap with our students, and it's not just our African-American students, it's our socioeconomically, disadvantaged students and so on, that there should be a plan, because that is a considerable amount of funding.
Well, I would at least say that that plan should include paying for the item on the agenda tonight. Mr. Searcy.
I didn't get a chance to ask this a few minutes ago, but on page 110, on the capital project fund for 16 to 17, the administrative facility has $72,000 that we're still going to be spending, I guess, and the the support services complex, another 30,000. What is that all about?
Yeah, good question.
The administrative facility, I believe, that is the leftover funds from the construction of this building. So that's still kind of in the budget there. The support services complex, I have to go back and look at the detail. I'll get you the detail.
I mean,
on
that's
that.
been, how long has that been?
Yeah, that's been completed for a while, so let me find out. I'll get back to you on that, sir.
Okay.
Any, yes,
I
go
do.
ahead.
Before we adjourn, I've noticed that like Sebastian River High School has a church that
Yes, they
uses it
rent.
on the weekends. Where would we see that revenue?
That-
And how much is it? Or if someone were to approach the district, are there any, I mean, how does one gain entry? What's our clear point of entry to?
That is through the risk management department, they do a use of facilities rental. That is a board-approved schedule, so to speak. I believe those funds go into the school's internal accounts. And so they manage those funds.
So would that include like a Boy Scouts at an elementary school, all of those things?
Boy Scouts.
If
There's
a Boy Scout troop was
There's a
using
tiered schedule depending on the
Yep.
type of group that
Yeah.
is utilizing the facility, and the first point of contact is actually at the school.
school.
We manage it centrally, but we work in partnership with the schools on that, so.
Yes, Ms.
Yeah, and I think, it might be a good idea, I know it's probably somewhere on the webpage, but it might be a good idea for the board members to get a copy of the procedures manual that you use for that, because it's very specific, it lays it out. And I think we've had this question numerous times, and I think if we were able to look at the document and see what specifically that looks like in the categories that are detailed, it would give us a better understanding when we are asked these questions, because that, you get the separation of church and state, and you get this and that, but it is all specified in that.
And I know Mr. Searcy has a question, but I want to make a plug for the marquees at the high school, since we're talking about enterprise funds. I would love to see local businesses advertise during the marquees. I know that the Sebastian does Vero have a? And so a plug to local businesses to support your schools. Please utilize those marquees. We appreciate that. Mr. Searcy?
Two things, the marquees are great, the signs on all of the fences are ridiculous, by the way, in my opinion. I appreciate the support, but it begins to look ridiculous. The campaign signs in front of our schools are getting to be a little bit out of hand, and I wish that somebody would take charge of that, and one day they would be gone. The other question on the rental of facilities, if a school principal were to charge more than the card rate that we have in that procedure, what happens in that case? Because I know that's happening. I know the card rate, and I know what's being charged, and I know that they're overcharging based on our school board policy. So what happens there?
If you could let me know specifically what school and what situation that is. I'm not aware of that. They're supposed to be charging the
Could you
published
let
rates.
us know, Mr. Searcy, what
I can
fund?
let you know. But the rest of that is that, and I think Sean maybe asked the question about who gets the money, and is it actually budgeted in with the school account, with Vero Beach High School's account, or whoever?
It's in the internal account, which is not reflected in the district budget.
Okay.
So they receive those funds. They pay for the additional custodian that may be needed for the event, that kind of thing. However, they send that check to us to cover that cost, and we run it through the payroll.
Yeah, we do still monitor the internal accounts and what's coming in and what's going out.
Yes.
And the last question is, from a board standpoint, is it possible for us to make each school site responsible for their utility cost? Right now, it's all borne by the district, my understanding. But if each school had the responsibility to maintain or to be responsible, I guess, for their electric cost, it may be that we might see some lights turned off and all, and if there's a benefit or a savings, we could have a plan where if the bill is $1 million for a year and you save $50,000, half of that may go back to the school as a bonus. I mean, we've saved $50,000 in net, we saved 25, but if is there some way we could do that? Because now they're not accountable. They don't care whether the lights are on, the air conditioner's on, any of that stuff.
So,
I'd suggest that we look at that.
yeah, there was a similar procedure in place in Brevard years ago when I was a principal there. So we'll explore that to see if it's possible to implement that here.
That's
And,
just one board member now. I can't speak for the rest of them, but
That sounds a lot like
Makes sense.
cost-based accounting, which
Yeah.
I've been a big supporter of since day one.
Mr. Menace?
So then, as a follow-up to the facilities rental, there's a district, in the district-wide services section on page 79, we have the general operating budget, and there are $50,000 for that line item, 575. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is for? Because for the 3 previous years, there is 0 allocation.
As I recall, that line item is for schools that do not have like the auditorium. They will rent the auditorium at the high schools for their SAC committee meetings or something of that nature.
So those are internal rentals, and then the
Yeah,
assumption
internal
is that those funds, look,
Go
for
back to the
example, if
school.
Glendale rents the Vero Beach High School
Correct.
patch for their graduation, they pay a fee.
So we just absorb it through here.
Right.
And, okay.
So we pay transfer cost,
Yeah,
to use an
essentially
accounting
transfer.
term. That, it seems odd to me, because now we have a situation where you have revenue generators that are essentially have an asset that the entire district is paid for. And I don't disagree with the practice. But we have high schools that have PACs, performing arts centers, and, then they rent them to our other schools, and I seem to believe that we've paid for those PACs with general funds, or capital fund,
Capital.
The entire district has paid for those PACs, and now we have, they become revenue sources that then those revenues stay at the site.
but I believe there's a different fee schedule for when other schools want to use the facility. So we'll explore that and get the answers to you, make sure.
And if we make them
Interesting.
pay for their own lights,
Yeah.
then if somebody's renting for free and they come over and the lights on the stage are on all night, it has to be some.
Right.
But I do want, though, because I am concerned, because there was a public statement that one school's overcharging.
Yeah.
That if you could, because we can't let that hang out there.
Yeah, we'll-
Either you get back and you say, we found it, we rectified it, or that was not true.
If Mr. Susi can share that with me, and we'll look into it,
I will.
definitely.
Okay.
Got it in my notes.
I'll be bringing up something in the later discussion session that might be helpful on that, too.
Okay.
Didn't have to get
Without
on the
any
agenda.
further, then we have no further questions? I've checked with the public. All right, with that, yes, ma'am.
I believe that was put online probably Monday morning or somewhere around that time. Yes.
Thank you. With no further questions, this meeting's adjourned.